I'm Nora Bennett, 31, and tonight I wore a black dress that cost more than I should have paid, not to impress my family, but to keep my nerves from showing. The fabric feels like courage stitched into seams. The chandelier over my parents' dining table throws little halos on crystal stems, and every one of those glints seems to land on my sister Paige. She sits at the far end with her trial notes tucked neatly in a leather folder. The picture of a woman who doesn't just arrive, she's awaited. My father lifts his glass and calls her the youngest attorney at her firm to pull off a win like this, and my mother's smile answers before Paige can. I try to add something small about work, about a system I helped build that actually makes people's jobs easier, and the room glides past me like a train that doesn't stop at my platform. My fork feels heavy, my water tastes metal cold, and my name floats in the air once as a cue to pass the potatoes. Then my mother turns, settles the silverware, and says, in the clear voice of a verdict, that I'm not even half the woman my sister is. The sound is so clean it seems to freeze the clock, and for the first time in years, I feel a door swing open inside me. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from in the comments, and tap like and subscribe if you've ever had to stand your ground at a table where your voice wasn't welcome. I grew up 2 blocks from the public park in a modest Colorado neighborhood, the kind where summer smelled like cut grass and barbecues, and winters came with borrowed sleds and hand-me-down boots. We learned to return what we borrowed and say thank you twice. My mother kept a tidy house and a fuller calendar, and she believed good manners could solve most problems. My father taught us to shake hands, look people in the eye, and keep our word even when it pinched. I was the quiet child who collected library cards and school ribbons, who liked clean columns and straight answers, who could sit with my grandmother for hours, while she taught me that kindness is not weakness if it's paired with a backbone. Paige, 3 years older, filled a room simply by walking into it. And our parents never hid how proud that made them. She charmed neighbors on the porch and teachers at open house while I stacked chairs after the event and made sure the lights were off. At home, our values were measured in helpfulness, thrift, and the good name of our family. In college, I learned that offices speak a different language, one that rewards the person who steps forward first. I found my footing in compliance work, where patience mattered and details built bridges. I liked the math of fairness and the quiet win of a clean audit, even if no one threw confetti for it. When I moved from our working-class block to downtown Denver's glass and steel, the air felt thinner. People talked bonuses over martinis while I packed leftovers, and their shoes didn't squeak on tile the way mine did after a long day. At first, coming home for dinners felt like a safe harbor roast chicken, the clink of ice against highballs, old stories that softened the edges of long weeks. Over time, the room changed, same china, same centerpiece, but the spotlight moved and stayed where it landed, and I learned how a person can be in a photograph and still not exist. Paige's milestones arrived in tidy frames, internships, clerkships, then celebratory captions typed with care. Mine were quiet processes that reduced errors, projects that worked because someone had to build them carefully, the kind of successes that don't fit in a toast. My parents' house holds the proof of our childhood in shoeboxes, yet somehow the narrative grew narrower as we got older, until praise thinned into a single lane with my sister's name on it. I adjusted the way quiet people adjust by making room, by picking up extra chairs, by bringing the store-bought pie, and cutting it neatly while others told the story of baking it. The older I got, the more I felt a distance between the values I was raised with: integrity, steadiness, doing your part, and the way those same values seemed to make me less visible in rooms where brightness wins. That gap widened tonight as I watched my mother angle the light toward Paige's newest victory and then level her gaze at me like a ruler on a desk. The moment doesn't come with thunder. It arrives with the soft scrape of a fork, the quick breath I take to steady my voice, and the way my father's praise settles on one child while the other waits for an invitation that never comes. I try to join the conversation with something small, an update about a system rollout that saved time for an entire department, and my mother replaces my sentence with a future promotion Paige might receive. The room continues, but I do not. Something stills. I have always believed in not making a scene, in letting people keep their pride, in saving the harder talks for quieter places, and I would have continued like that if not for the clean edge of my mother's remark, half a woman, which slices through the carefulness I'm known for. The words land without flourish, and their echo settles at my feet like broken glass. I can't ignore, and suddenly the old lessons reorganize themselves. Kindness, yes, but not at the expense of truth. Humility, yes, but not at the cost of vanishing. I lift my glass to my lips so my hands have something to do, and in that small pause, the future shifts not with a grand speech, but with a simple choice to say the sentence I have never said out loud. The chandelier hums, the clock resumes its steady tick, and the light around the table is bright enough to see finally what has been happening for years. I set the glass down and meet my mother's eyes, and my voice is calm when I tell them there is something they need to know. My father's smile falters, my sister's posture changes, and the air pulls tight the way it does right before a storm. This house has held our birthdays and holidays, and every photograph that pretends we were always on the same page. It's about to hold something else. I reach for my purse, steady as a metronome, and open it to the one thing no one in this room expects to see me bring to the table. The fork clattered from my father's hand when the words left my mouth. Then let Paige pay the mortgage, I had said, quiet but sharp enough to split the air. For a long moment, no one moved, no one spoke. Paige froze with her champagne glass lifted halfway, her expression startled. My mother's face went pale as if the chandelier's light had suddenly drained her. "Mortgage?" My father demanded, his voice hard and uneven. "What mortgage?" His question was heavy with the kind of denial that isn't ignorance, but fear of being exposed. I reached for my purse, fingers unsteady, and pulled out my phone. The screen glowed in my hand, a little square of proof I had carried for years. This one, I said, opening the banking app and scrolling through months of transactions. February 15th, 2021, $2,500. You said it would be just once, just enough to stop foreclosure. My mother pushed her chair back, the scrape of wood against tile breaking the silence. "This isn't dinner talk," she snapped, her voice brittle. "I'll get dessert." But my hands kept moving, pulling up March, April, May, each line with the same heading mortgage payment. My voice steadied as I read them aloud. Every month since then, between $1,200 and $2,400, depending on the crisis. My father's jaw tightened, and he tried to cover the truth with a new story. "We've had setbacks in the business, Nora. Temporary." The words sounded weak, as though even he didn't believe it. I turned to Paige, who was staring at me as though the table had been turned upside down. "Did you know I asked? Did you know that while you were buying your condo and planning your promotion dinners, I was paying for this house?" Her hand trembled as she lowered the glass. "They told me they were helping you," she whispered. "They said you were struggling." A laugh escaped me, sharp and without joy. "That's what they told you." My mother returned from the kitchen without dessert, tears already on her face. "A daughter supports her family," she said, her voice heavy with practiced sorrow. "That's how we raised you, Nora. Family comes first." I looked at her across the spread of untouched food. "Family comes first, yes," I answered. "But to you I've only ever been the family's safety net. Never the one you celebrate, only the one you lean on until I break." My father shifted in his seat, color rising in his face, but he didn't contradict me. For once he had no words to cover the silence that followed. The numbers rolled off my tongue before I realized I'd memorized them. $84,000. That's what I've sent you over 4 years. The words fell heavy in the room as if they had their own weight. 84,000 that could have been my home, my MBA, my retirement. Instead, it kept you from losing this house. My sister's eyes filled with disbelief, then shame. My mother pressed her napkin to her mouth, and my father reached for his wine, swallowing hard. But there was no way to swallow down the truth anymore. I felt it settle in the room like smoke impossible to clear. That night, back in my apartment, I couldn't sleep. The memory of my mother's late-night call 4 years earlier played again in my mind. The phone had rung past 11, her voice breaking, as she said they were about to lose the house. She spoke in sobs, words like, "foreclosure auction, 30 days." I had been half asleep, the savings for my first down payment glowing on my laptop screen only minutes before. She asked for $2,500, said my father had a contract coming through soon, said they had nowhere else to turn. I clicked the transfer with hands that shook, listening as she told me what a good daughter I was. That first night I believed her. But the calls kept coming. Each month brought another story, another emergency. I gave $1,200, $1,500, $2,000, always with a promise attached. This would be the last time. The contract was nearly done. The client had just delayed payment. By the 6th month, I no longer waited for the promises to mean anything. I set up an automatic transfer, not to help them, but to protect myself from the endless begging. It was easier to give up the money than to live in the cycle of explanations and guilt. Each month, the numbers slipped from my account, and each month I felt myself disappear a little more. I kept a spreadsheet at first, neat columns with dates and totals, a separate tab for opportunities I had to decline. The condo that sold out before I could catch up. The graduate program I deferred twice. The wedding in Spain I missed because flights were too expensive. After 2 years, I stopped updating the list. It had grown too long, too heavy. Instead, I microwaved ramen in the office kitchen and scrolled past photos of my parents' anniversary dinner at a fine restaurant, my father's new golf clubs, propped in the corner of the dining room. I said no to camping trips with friends, told them I was busy or broke until they stopped asking. The cost grew beyond money. A credit card application came back denied for lack of history. I stayed in a 1-bedroom apartment while my sister closed on her condo, family comments showering her with praise for financial maturity. My parents never said my name when they praised responsibility, though I was the one holding the roof over their heads. I swallowed it all, every quiet cut, every overlooked effort, because I had convinced myself that family required sacrifice. But sacrifice turned into erasure until I was little more than a line item on my parents' mortgage statement. It was Grace, my coworker, who saw me unraveling. One afternoon she cornered me over coffee, her voice gentle but unflinching. "Nora, you can't set yourself on fire to keep other people warm." I tried to argue, but the words didn't come. She pulled a napkin close, started writing numbers, and showed me what the money I'd lost had cost in compound interest, in retirement contributions, in years of growth I'd never see again. My hands shook as she laid it all out, not with judgment, but with clarity. "Do you understand what you're giving up?" she asked. I didn't answer. But for the first time, I allowed myself to see it. That night I lay awake with my phone glowing and the dark thumb hovering over the button that would cancel the automatic transfer. For 4 years, I had carried the weight of their mortgage on my back, believing it was love, believing it was duty. But love shouldn't hollow you out. Duty shouldn't feel like chains. My finger trembled, but before the sun rose, I pressed confirm. The transfer ended, and for the first time in years, my paycheck would be mine. Relief swept through me like air after a long dive, and beneath the fear, something unexpected bloomed: freedom. But freedom comes with its own cost. The next morning, my phone rang before my coffee cooled. My father's voice filled the voicemail with anger, accusing me of betrayal, demanding I call back. My mother followed with tearful messages, each more desperate than the last. By afternoon, Paige sent a text. "They say you're punishing them. What's happening? They won't stop calling me." I typed my reply with steady hands. "Ask them about the mortgage I've been paying for 4 years. The dots blinked on my screen, appeared, disappeared, then returned. Finally, a single answer came through. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea." The messages didn't stop with Paige. Aunts and uncles called. Cousins emailed. Even family friends reached out, each carrying the same line: "Your parents are hurting. You should help them." It was a storm of voices sent to wear me down. Grace had a name for it: flying monkeys, she said, from the story where the witch sends others to do her work. It was a tactic as old as control itself, but this time something inside me was different. I no longer saw myself as the daughter who owed them everything. I saw myself as someone who had been exploited and who had finally chosen to stop. And as I stood in my apartment listening to the silence after I blocked their calls, I knew the hardest part was still coming. My parents had spent 4 years rewriting the story of who I was, and they weren't about to let me take back the pen without a fight. The first week after I cut off the transfers, the silence in my apartment felt heavier than it should have. For 4 years, every paycheck had been spoken for before it hit my account. Now it lingered there, a balance that should have brought comfort, but instead pressed against me with questions I wasn't ready to answer. I sat at my small kitchen table in the evenings, scrolling through old photos online. My parents at dinner with friends. My father smiling on a golf course holding a new club. My mother posting about family blessings beneath a photo of a steak dinner. Each image felt like a reminder that while I ate microwave noodles, they were dining well under the shelter I had paid for. Invitations stopped arriving from friends who had grown tired of hearing me say I couldn't make it. They'd once invited me to camping trips, weekend road trips, even simple brunches, but each time I declined with some version of the same excuse. I told them money was tight or that I had something else scheduled. After a while, the texts thinned, and then they stopped. I knew it wasn't cruelty, just fatigue. No one likes the friend who never comes. I kept busy with work, telling myself it was enough, even though I felt the edges of my world shrinking. The hardest part was watching Paige's life move forward as mine stalled. Photos of her condo closing were plastered across our family group thread, the captions glowing with pride. A real homeowner at last, my mother had written, followed by congratulations from every aunt, uncle, and cousin. When I scrolled back through the thread, I saw silence under the messages I'd shared. Things like finishing a compliance rollout at work or hitting another year without debt. My words had floated into the group like pebbles into a pond. No ripples. Paige's, though, always caused waves. At family holidays, the pattern was always the same. My mother asked about my sister's cases, and my father told old stories about how clever she'd been as a child. If I tried to add anything, the conversation shifted around me like water flowing past a stone. I started to wonder if maybe I'd been a fool all along. I had put away dreams of my own home, pushed back my graduate program twice, and watched retirement plans disappear from my account. And still, when they looked at me, all they saw was someone not living up to Paige. It was Grace who forced me to say things out loud. We sat in a quiet corner of a cafe one evening, her pen scratching across a napkin as she showed me the numbers. "Here's what you've lost in compound interest," she said. "Here's where your retirement would be. Here's the condo you could have afforded 2 years ago." I stared at the lines, my throat tight. "They wouldn't understand," I whispered. Grace tapped the napkin with her finger. "It's not about them understanding, Nora. It's about you seeing the truth." Her voice carried no judgment, just a kind of steadiness that made me feel less alone. I went home that night with the napkin folded in my purse, heavier than the phone that held years of bank transfers. I sat on the edge of my bed with the lamp casting a soft circle of light, and I opened my laptop to look again at the graduate program I had deferred. The words, "financial circumstances," stared back at me from my old deferral notice, a phrase that had kept me still for years. My acceptance letter was buried in a drawer, but I knew the program would only hold my place for so long. I closed the laptop before I could decide, too afraid of what a yes might mean if my parents called again. When the calls started, they didn't come directly from my parents. At first it was my Aunt Caroline, her voice sweet but firm. "Your mother is worried sick," she said. "They need you, Nora. You're abandoning them." The next day it was my cousin Drew, who hadn't spoken to me in 2 years, but suddenly felt the need to remind me that family always pulls together. The pressure came from every direction, voices carrying the same rehearsed line. I didn't answer most of them. I blocked numbers when I had to. Grace called it a tactic, but to me, it just felt like standing in the center of a storm with every gust trying to push me back into place. At night, the loneliness felt sharper. I sat in my apartment with the blinds drawn, the television running for noise, but nothing felt solid. For years, even if I was resentful, I had felt needed. Now the silence made me question who I was without their demands. I tried to focus on work, burying myself in projects, staying later at the office, just so I didn't have to sit in that stillness. My colleagues noticed. "You okay?" one asked gently at the copier. I smiled and said I was fine, but my reflection in the machine's glass told another story. The breaking point came one weekend when I walked past a storefront with an advertisement for new condos. The sign showed open windows and bright kitchens with the words, "starting at $285,000. I stopped on the sidewalk, staring at the image as though it were meant for me. That price had once been within my reach before the transfers began. Now it was a reminder of everything that had slipped through my hands. I stood there longer than I should have, feeling the weight of what I had given up press against me harder than any phone call or family comment ever had. That night, I opened my bank app and scrolled back through 4 years of history. The numbers blurred, but the totals burned themselves into my mind. $84,000. The figure sat there, undeniable. I whispered it out loud, just to hear it. 84,000. My stomach twisted, not just at the money, but at the realization that I had given up more than dollars. I had given up years. I had given up a chance at the life I wanted, all in the name of keeping them comfortable. The phone buzzed on my nightstand with another message from Paige. "They're saying you're punishing them," she wrote. "They won't stop calling me." I typed back, "Ask them about the mortgage." The typing dots blinked on my screen, disappearing and returning before her answer finally came. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know." Her words should have soothed me, but instead they sank into me with a dull ache. Even she had been part of the story they built, believing I was the one in need while I held their house above water with every paycheck. When the messages slowed, I realized something had shifted. They weren't stopping because they accepted my decision. They were stopping because they were regrouping. I could feel it in the silence, the way a storm pauses before the next strike. I knew my parents wouldn't let go easily. They had leaned on me for too long, and now that I had stepped away, they would find another way to pull me back in. And as I stood by the window that night looking at the dark city outside, I understood that this battle was far from over. I woke early on Monday with sunlight sliding through the blinds, the quiet of my apartment carrying a weight that was unfamiliar but steady. My phone rested on the nightstand, glowing with the same screen I had stared at hours before. I had pressed the button that canceled the automatic transfer. It was done. For the first time in 4 years, the money I earned would remain in my account. My stomach felt hollow, the kind of emptiness that comes after stepping off a high ledge, but beneath it was something I didn't recognize: relief. The relief didn't last long. By the time I poured my first cup of coffee, my father's voice filled my voicemail. He sounded firm, almost scolding, saying what I had done was disgraceful, accusing me of betrayal. My mother followed with messages full of tears, her voice cracking, as she asked how I could abandon them. By afternoon, I had blocked both numbers, not out of anger, but because I couldn't listen anymore. The silence afterward was jarring, but necessary. When Paige texted later, saying they were insisting I was punishing them, I answered with a single line, "Ask them about the mortgage." Her reply came slowly, a short sentence that carried its own weight. I had no idea. The silence didn't mean peace. Relatives began calling from out-of-state voices carrying rehearsed lines about family obligation. My aunt in Michigan told me it wasn't too late to make things right. My uncle in Arizona left a message about responsibility, hinting that my parents had sacrificed for me. Each call came with a tone that was both concerned and pressing. Grace called it a tactic, but to me it felt like standing in a circle of voices, each one reminding me of who I was supposed to be. I blocked numbers one after the other until only a few remained, but even then the silence felt crowded. I needed a place where the noise couldn't reach me. Grace met me at a cafe across from the office, her hands wrapped around a cup while she listened. When I finished, she leaned in and said quietly, "You need someone who can look at this from the outside. Not a friend, not family, someone who can call it what it is." Her words settled into me with the kind of clarity I had been avoiding. She scribbled the name of a financial advisor on a napkin, sliding it across the table. "She's good," Grace said. "She won't tell you what you want to hear. She'll tell you the truth." The office where Denise Carter worked smelled faintly of leather and lemon polish. Her desk was neat, every file squared to the edge. She adjusted her glasses as I handed her the stack of statements I had printed 4 years of bank transfers. She scanned them quietly, her brow tightening with each page. Finally, she looked up and said, $84,000, and not once have they acknowledged it. I shook my head. Her voice was calm, but there was no softness in it when she spoke again. "Nora, this is exploitation. It doesn't matter that they are your parents. Financial exploitation is still exploitation." The words stung sharp and undeniable. She leaned forward, her tone steady. "You had no legal obligation to make these payments. You gave up a home, an education, and years of savings. It is time you stopped giving." She began outlining a budget, her pen moving quickly across the page. She showed me where I could be in 5 years if I redirected the money into my own accounts. The numbers made my chest tighten. College funds for children I didn't yet have, retirement contributions that finally grew the down payment I had once dreamed of. When she slid the paper across the desk, her eyes softened. "This is what your life could look like," she said. I left her office carrying that paper, like it was a map. The next morning, I transferred the same amount I had always sent my parents, but this time into an investment account with my name on it. The confirmation screen glowed like a small victory. I stared at it until my hands stopped trembling. That afternoon, I logged into the graduate program portal and filled out the enrollment form I had deferred again and again. When the confirmation email arrived, I sat at my desk in silence, the words, "Welcome back," carrying a weight I hadn't felt in years. For the first time in a long time, the steps I was taking were mine alone. 3 weeks passed, and the calls from relatives slowed. Paige sent me short, careful messages, never pressing too hard, but never disappearing either. My parents alternated between silence and sudden attempts at contact, sometimes a voicemail heavy with anger, other times a note left in my mailbox. I didn't answer. Instead, I practiced. Grace helped me write a sentence, one I repeated in front of my bathroom mirror until it felt natural. "I love you, but your mortgage is not my responsibility." The words were simple, direct, unshakable. I said them over and over, watching my reflection grow steadier each time. It was a Sunday evening when the knock came. 3 sharp raps, the cadence of my father's hand. I didn't need to check the peephole. When I opened the door, both of them stood there, my mother's eyes red-rimmed, my father's jaw set. They stepped inside before I could answer. "This has gone on long enough," my father said, pacing my small living room. "You've made your point. Do you have any idea what people are saying?" "Your aunt thinks you're having a breakdown." My mother reached for my hand, her voice softer. "You're destroying this family, Nora. Please just help us through this." I stood near the kitchen counter, my palms pressed flat against the cool surface to keep myself steady. $84,000 is not a little help," I said. My father's face flushed. "So that's it. You're abandoning us." I met his gaze. "I'm not abandoning you. I'm stopping the abandonment of myself." My mother's tears spilled freely. "After everything we've done for you," I swallowed hard, the rehearsed line rising from somewhere deeper than practice. "I love you both," I said quietly. "But your mortgage is not my responsibility. It never was." They left 7 minutes later, my father stiff with anger, my mother sobbing as she stepped into the hallway. The door closed behind them with a soft click, and I sank to the floor, tears coming hard and sudden. But beneath the sobs was something lighter, a current that felt like air returning to lungs that had been held too long. That night, I slept 8 hours straight, the first time in 4 years. When morning came, the city outside my window looked different, no longer a weight, but a landscape I could step into. And as the sun lit the skyline, I knew something had shifted permanently. The ties that had bound me to their demands were loosening. For the first time since that late-night call 4 years earlier, I could feel the shape of my own life forming. But freedom, I was learning, comes with its own battles, and the next one was already on its way. The morning after my parents left my apartment, I lingered by the window longer than usual. The city stretched below me, sharp with early light, but instead of feeling heavy, it felt wide open. I had drawn a line the night before, words I had never said aloud until then, and once spoken, they couldn't be taken back. My hands still shook when I thought about it, but under the trembling was a quiet certainty. For the first time in years, my life felt like it belonged to me. At work, that change carried into the way people looked at me. I had spent years slipping into meetings unnoticed, letting others take the credit. But now, when I presented, I stood straighter, my voice clearer. During a morning briefing, my director Thomas stopped the room mid-discussion to say, "This compliance system Nora designed has reduced processing time by 32%. The applause that followed wasn't polite, it was genuine. For once, I wasn't the shadow in the corner. My name carried weight in a space where I had always felt invisible. A week later, my supervisor pulled me into his office with a smile. "Project team lead," he said, sliding the letter across the desk. "You've earned this." I stared at the words on the page, barely able to believe them. All those years of staying late, of keeping things together, while my life at home unraveled suddenly, they weren't just quiet efforts. No one noticed. They were recognized. That night, I walked home through downtown, the city lights blinking against glass towers, and I let myself feel something I had almost forgotten: pride. With the promotion came a little more freedom. I joined a cooking class at the community center, something small but new. On weeknights, instead of microwaving ramen, I stirred pots of simmering tomato sauce, learned to knead dough with neighbors I'd only waved to in passing before. When Mrs. Winters, who lived down the hall, asked about my lasagna, I promised to bring her leftovers. 6 months ago, I would have brushed past her with an excuse. Now I had the time, the money, and the willingness to say yes. The Rockies became my other escape. Grace introduced me to a hiking group, and I found myself climbing trails I had only seen in photographs. The air at the summit was thin and biting, but it carried a kind of release. One weekend I stood on a ridge, the valley stretched wide beneath me, and I let the wind carry out a scream I had held for years. It left me hoarse, but lighter. By the time we made it back down, I could feel something inside me loosening, like knots finally beginning to untangle. Opportunities began to arrive in ways I hadn't expected. One afternoon, my desk phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Nora Bennett. "This is Marissa Johnson with Parker Executive Search. Your name came recommended for a director position with Westlake Financial Technologies in Seattle." My pen nearly slipped from my hand. She explained the role, the responsibilities, the salary 45% higher than what I earned, plus equity. Seattle, 3 states away. A new city, a fresh start. I promised to think about it, but the idea lodged itself in my mind and refused to leave. That evening, I pulled up virtual tours of apartments in Seattle. One showed a 14th floor unit with floor-to-ceiling windows, Mount Rainier painted across the horizon. The realtor named a figure that once would have been impossible, but now, with no transfers draining my account, I realized I could afford it. My calculator confirmed it in seconds. 2 years of the Seattle salary equaled 4 years of mortgage payments I had made for my parents. I closed my laptop with my heart still racing, knowing I was standing at the edge of another ledge, but this one felt different. This one looked like freedom. While I weighed the decision, Paige called one evening. "I talked to Dad," she said quietly. He admitted it. 4 years of you paying their mortgage while they told me you were struggling." There was a pause, then her voice cracked. "They took advantage of you. I'm so sorry I didn't see it." I sat on the edge of my couch, the phone warm in my hand. "It's not your fault," I told her. She hesitated. "Are you really thinking about Seattle?" I let out a breath. "Yes. For the first time in my life, I think I'm ready for something bigger than them, bigger than all of this." The following weekend, I began packing. Each item went through a simple test. Did it serve my future, or did it tie me to the past? The donation pile grew larger than the keep pile. Old frames, souvenirs, and worn furniture stayed behind. Into boxes went only what I wanted to carry into the next chapter. On my fridge, I pinned the acceptance letter from the graduate program right next to the hiking schedule for the next month. For the first time, everything in my life seemed to point forward instead of back. The contract from Seattle arrived 2 weeks later. Relocation assistance benefits from day one, and the title of director printed in bold letters. I signed it with a pen that didn't shake. That night, I walked to the balcony of my apartment, the Denver skyline familiar, but suddenly too small, and I let the cool air wash over me. Below, cars streamed in steady lines of light, but I stood above them knowing I had chosen a different road. A month later, I stood in my new Seattle condo, dawn painting the city in amber and rose. The Space Needle gleamed in the distance, and Mount Rainier stood behind it like a guardian. I wrapped my hands around a cup of coffee, the kind I used to deny myself, and for once, it didn't taste like guilt. My phone buzzed on the counter. My parents again. Another message about how they were struggling, how my absence had left them in crisis. I set the phone down without opening it. The second buzz was different, a message from Grace reminding me of the hiking trip at Boulder Creek I would miss now. Her words made me smile. My life was no longer built on panic and demands. It was built on choice. Yet even in this new space, their presence tried to reach me. Grace sent a photo she thought I should see. It was my parents' house, a banner stretched across the front bold red letters reading, "Congratulations, Paige, for saving the family home." The coffee slipped from my hand, shattering against the hardwood hot liquid splashing across my feet. My lungs squeezed tight, rage rising sharp and immediate. 4 years, $84,000, and now once again my name erased. I knelt among the shards, the sting of ceramic pressing into my palms, and I steadied myself. They had rewritten the story one more time, but this time I wasn't the woman I had been when it began. I would not stay silent. This time I would bring the truth into the light. The banner haunted me long after the photo vanished from my phone screen. Red letters across white fabric stretched over the house I had kept standing. 4 years, $84,000 erased with one careless lie. The coffee cooled on the floor where it had spilled, but my mind was too sharp to notice the burn across my feet. I steadied my hands against the table, breathing through the rush of anger that left me shaking. My parents hadn't just ignored what I had done. They had rewritten history, handing the credit to the daughter who had never paid a cent toward their mortgage. That night, I pulled my laptop close and began digging through every record I still had. Bank statements, text messages, emails with subject lines that blurred together urgent emergency just this once. Each plea, each payment, every small deception lined up like stones in a wall I had unknowingly built. I printed them until the stack grew thick on the desk, then scanned them again into a file I named only with the years. My phone buzzed as the printer hummed. Paige's name lit the screen. "Did you see it?" she asked before I could say hello. Her voice carried shame, but also anger. "They're telling people I've been paying their mortgage. They even told the church." I sat in silence a moment, then let out a hollow laugh. Of course they did. 2 days later, an invitation arrived in my inbox. Cream-colored stationery with scripted letters announced a dinner in Paige's honor. Join us in celebrating her dedication to family values. Below the date was set the venue, their house, the same one my money had saved. Within hours, a voicemail followed my mother's voice syrupy and coaxing. "We hope you'll come, Nora. It's time to put differences aside and support your sister." I replayed it twice, the word support landing sharper each time. The thought of walking back into that house under a banner of lies made my skin prickle. But the idea of staying silent felt worse. I called Grace that evening, the fury still fresh. "They're throwing her a party for paying their mortgage," I said flatly. "Only I'm the one who did it." She was quiet for a moment, then asked, "What are you going to do?" My hand brushed the folder on my desk, the weight of the paper steadying me. "I'm going to tell the truth," I said. The decision settled inside me like a stone, finally at rest. On the night of the dinner, I stood at the familiar porch folder tucked beneath my arm. Through the windows, I could see guests moving about, glasses and hand music spilling from the speakers. My heart thudded against my ribs as I rang the bell. Paige opened the door, her eyes wide when she saw me. "You came," she whispered. "Did you think I wouldn't?" I stepped past her into the living room, where the decorations glittered in a way that didn't match their claimed struggles. Flowers in tall vases, a catered spread on the table, a slideshow on the projector titled "The Bennett Family Legacy of Support." My mother's voice lifted above the hum of conversation. "Nora, what a surprise," she said, her smile stretched tight. "We weren't sure you'd make it." My father's hand rested on her shoulder, his grin practiced. "Pumpkin, come in. We were just about to toast your sister." The room stilled as I walked forward, the folder pressed tight against my side. "May I add something to the presentation?" I asked. My father nodded, his confidence sure. Of course, he said, certain he still controlled the story. But the story had already shifted. I connected my laptop to the projector. The slideshow flickered away, replaced with a plain title slide, 48 months, $84,000. Nora. Murmurs rippled through the room. My mother's voice cut through sharply. "What is this?" I opened the folder and laid the first document on the table. "The truth," I said. The slide shifted to a spreadsheet of transactions, rows of dates and amounts, each marked with the words, "mortgage payment." Gasps broke from the crowd. My aunt covered her mouth. My cousin shifted uneasily in his chair. "I don't think this is appropriate," my mother began, stepping toward the projector. "Neither is lying to everyone here," I answered, clicking to the next slide. Messages filled the screen, my mother's words enlarged. "We're desperate, Nora. Just this once. We'll pay you back soon." Each one was familiar, each one real. My father hissed at me, his face flushed. "You're humiliating us." I met his eyes. "If the truth humiliates you, that isn't my fault." I clicked again. The next slide showed statements that didn't match their please golf club memberships, expensive dinners, trips they had never mentioned. While I gave up my down payment, my graduate program, my future, I said, "This is what you spent." My mother's voice broke as she shouted, "Stop this immediately!" But the room had already shifted. Guests whispered to each other, their expressions filled with recognition. Paige stood frozen near the projector, her face pale. She didn't need to speak. The horror in her eyes said enough. The final slide filled the screen with the photo of the banner across their house. Across it, I had written in bold black letters, "Truth paid by Nora." The room was silent. My Aunt Judith rose slowly from her chair. For years, she had defended my parents, her voice always the first to silence any criticism. But now, she began to clap, slow and deliberate. "It's about time someone told the truth in this family," she said. A few cousins nodded, the current shifting in the room at last. My mother tried one final defense, her voice strained. "Family matters should stay private." I looked at her evenly. "Private like the banner on your house." Her lips parted, but no words came. That was when Paige moved. She walked across the room and stood beside me, her shoulders squared. She didn't need to say a word. Her choice was clear. For the first time in our lives, we faced our parents together, no longer divided into golden and invisible. We stood in the light of the truth, and the chains that had held me for years finally broke. But the silence that followed was not an ending. It was a beginning, the kind that carries both release and consequence. I knew the fallout of that night would reach far beyond that room, and the hardest decisions were still ahead. The living room was silent after my final slide. My mother stood trembling near the projector, my father's jaw rigid, the weight of their silence pressing into every corner of the house. I closed my laptop with deliberate care, slipped the folder of papers back under my arm, and turned toward the doorway. For once, I wasn't leaving with my head down. Paige walked at my side, our shoulders aligned, and the guests parted quietly as we passed. No one tried to stop us. No one had the words. Outside, the air felt cold against my face, but it carried a strange sense of release. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying their secrets anymore. 6 months later, I sat at a corner cafe in Seattle, honey dissolving into my tea, while Paige stirred her coffee across from me. She had flown in for the weekend, her lawyer's posture softened by exhaustion. "They showed up at my condo last month," she said, shaking her head, "with papers to add your name to the deed of their house." Her voice held disbelief. I set my spoon down. "Their version of an apology," I answered. Paige gave me a look. "And you turned it down." "It wasn't a question. I already own my own home," I said simply, nodding toward the high-rise visible through the window. "I don't need a name on their deed. I need respect." Paige leaned back in her chair, studying me with a mixture of relief and something heavier. "They still don't get it," she murmured. I didn't answer. Some truths didn't need repeating. Outside, the ferry boats crossed Elliott Bay, white wakes trailing behind them. For months, I had felt like one of those ferries cutting a path forward, leaving the past rippling out behind me. Work had transformed as much as my personal life. The compliance system I built won an innovation award, my team's name printed in the industry newsletter. "Vice President," my boss had said, smiling as he shook my hand. The words settled on me like a mantle, firm and fitting. At a conference later that spring, I spoke on a panel about ethical leadership. My voice carried through the packed hall as I described the importance of boundaries in business and life. When the applause came, it wasn't just for my work. It was for the way I had stood up when it mattered. Outside of work, I found new circles that felt more like family than the one I had been born into. I joined 3 women on weekend hikes, our boots crunching over alpine trails, our laughter echoing between pines. On one drive back from Mount Rainier, Tina teased me gently. "Rachel asked about you again," she said, wiggling her eyebrows. Heat rushed to my face. Dating without the weight of financial anxiety felt different, lighter, filled with possibility instead of fear. It wasn't love yet, but for the first time in years, I could imagine it. I also began teaching a financial literacy workshop at the community center. The first night, only a handful of women came, their faces wary but hopeful. I held up a copy of my old spreadsheet, the one that had tracked every payment, every sacrifice, and I told them, boundaries aren't selfish. They're the foundation of every authentic relationship. A young woman in the back raised her hand. "But what if it's family?" she asked. I looked her in the eye. "Especially then," I said. The room went quiet. I saw myself in her expression, the way she clutched her pen too tightly, and I hoped my words gave her what I had needed years ago. By late summer, Paige returned for another visit. We cooked pasta together in my kitchen, the sauce bubbling on the stove while Sinatra played from a speaker on the counter. She spilled wine on my countertop, and we both laughed, the sound spilling through the apartment like something we had never shared before. "Remember when Mom used to measure the pasta?" Paige asked, twirling noodles onto her fork. 2 ounces for you, 3 for Dad, 1 for me, because actresses need to stay slim." I smiled at our heaping plates. "And now look at us," I said. 2 sisters eating without rules, without comparisons, just sharing the same table on equal ground. That night we talked until the candles burned low, about patterns we hadn't questioned, as children about choices we were finally making for ourselves. Paige set her glass down thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about taking a real vacation," she said. "Not a networking trip, not something I can bill as work. Just joy." I tilted my head. "Where would you go?" She paused, then smiled softly. She corrected. "Where would we go, sisters only?" The word lingered between us like a bridge we were both ready to step onto. Months passed, and my world grew larger, not smaller. At work, my title changed officially, Vice President of Compliance, and with it came a corner office and a team that trusted me. At the community center, the financial workshop doubled in size. Women sharing stories of their own quiet sacrifices and learning one step at a time how to reclaim their futures. At home, I began setting aside money into a new account, not for survival, not for obligation, but for something that felt like legacy. I labeled it for my niece Paige's daughter, a seed fund for her education. For the first time, giving didn't drain me. It filled me because it came from choice. On quiet evenings, I sometimes stepped onto my balcony, the Olympic mountains glowing gold in the distance. My phone no longer buzzed with urgent pleas or tearful accusations. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was peace. I wrote in my journal, "Worth isn't measured in sacrifice. Love without respect is just use. Starting over at 30 isn't failure. It's courage." The words steadied me like anchors, reminders that the life I was living was finally mine. But as autumn deepened, a letter arrived in my mailbox with my parents' handwriting on the envelope. I held it for a long time before opening it, the paper warm from my hand. Whatever was inside, I knew it wouldn't undo the choices I had made. Still, the sight of their names reminded me that endings rarely arrive clean. They linger, demanding to be faced one last time. The envelope with my parents' handwriting sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days before I opened it. Their script was still familiar, my mother's careful loops, my father's heavy strokes. Inside was a letter, pages folded neatly, the words starting with the same phrases they had always used. They spoke of sacrifice, of family, of how much they believed I owed them. But between the lines, I saw something else. Fear. The same fear that had led them to call me that first night 4 years ago. The fear that their safety net had vanished and they were left to face themselves. I read it twice, folded it back into the envelope, and slid it into a drawer. Not out of spite, but because I no longer needed their explanations. I had already given them years of my life. I didn't need to give them my peace, too. Instead, I focused on what had grown since I stepped away. My work had flourished in ways I couldn't have imagined. The promotion to vice president brought new challenges, but also new respect. For the first time, my voice carried weight in rooms where I had once been overlooked. People listened when I spoke. They trusted me to lead. That trust felt heavier than any paycheck, though the paycheck finally reflected my worth as well. At the community center, the financial literacy workshop had doubled in size. Each week, women sat in folding chairs with notebooks open, their faces tense as they described the ways they had been cornered by family or partners. I shared my story not to dwell on it, but to show them that stepping away was possible. Boundaries aren't walls, I told them one evening. They're doors you learn to close when someone walks in without knocking. Their nods reminded me that my pain had been reshaped into something useful, something that could outlast me. Paige and I began to rebuild in our own quiet way. She visited when her schedule allowed, and when she did, we made meals together like we never had as children. No one kept score. No one competed for praise. We sat at the same table as equals, sharing laughter and silence in a way that felt like healing. One evening she surprised me by saying, "I want my daughter to grow up knowing the truth. Not the stories Mom and Dad told us, but what real love looks like." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand, grateful that even after everything some ties could be repaired. I also began saving for that niece, setting aside money each month in a new account. Not out of obligation, but because I wanted to. This time the giving didn't come with strings. It came from choice, and choice made all the difference. The mountains became another kind of sanctuary. On weekends I hiked with Grace and the others, our boots cutting through wildflower fields or snow-dusted paths. At the summits, the wind pressed hard against my skin, and I let it remind me how far I had climbed, not just in miles, but in years of carrying what wasn't mine. Each trail felt like a chapter closed, each horizon a new beginning. One evening, as the sun slid low over the city, I stood on my balcony and thought about the girl I had been at 27, answering the phone in the dark, listening to my mother's sobs as I drained my savings. I thought about the woman at 31 who had finally said, "Your mortgage is not my responsibility." Both of them were me, but only one of them was free. What I have learned is that love without respect isn't love at all. It's use. That sacrifice only matters if it's shared, not demanded. And that starting over at 30 or any age is not failure. It is courage. I no longer measure my worth by how much I give away. I measure it by the life I am building, the work I believe in, the sister I've found, again the community I can pour into by choice. And in that, I am whole. If you've listened this far, I hope my story leaves you with something to carry. Maybe a reminder that boundaries can be love too. Maybe the courage to say no when someone asks too much. Or maybe just the quiet knowledge that starting over is never too late. Tell me in the comments if you've ever had to reclaim your own worth from someone who didn't see it. And if this story stayed with you, I'd be grateful if you subscribe to hear the next one. Until then, take care of yourself and remember you are whole too.